Our next speaker is Stephen ROSSCOE, and he is going to talk about North American Conodont events and stratigraphy. Steve, you're on.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks to Bill and Spencer for putting all this together, and thank you to Jim Barrick, my co-author on all this research that we've been doing on Idionothotis in this time interval, and he'll chime in at the end of this talk to cover a lot of the global correlation issues, which he is much more involved in than I have been as of late. So he'll kind of take the lead on that part of the talk at the end. What I'm going to do today is kind of approach this as a kind of review of what's going on in the mid-continent and kind of focus on the morphological variations that we're seeing. And we'll start somewhere near kind of the base of the Kasimovian more traditionally and work our way up to the areas we've been working. So if I could have the next slide. So we'll start, we'll go over kind of the mid-continent stratigraphy and how that relates to the Kasimovian a bit. Then we'll focus a great deal on kind of how Idionothotis conodonts vary. We'll look at some of the other genera that are present and how they vary a little bit through this interval. And then we'll get into kind of a cycle by cycle or formation by formation look at the Idionothodid conodonts and kind of the context of that. And at the very end, we'll get into that global context of our base Kasimovian and what that means and how maybe we should go about correlating this. Next slide, please. So this is a very messy slide just to show you how busy things are in this interval and in the study of kind of conodonts in general in North America. The whole cyclothem formation system that we see here is listed, and somewhere around the base of the Farlington is more close to the approximate Kasimovian boundary in the Donetsk Basin and Moscow Basin. So we'll start down there in this talk, and we'll look at how Idionothotis and other species change as we approach kind of the Missourian Des Moines boundary in North America, and then again how that continues to change following the Des Moines Missourian boundary. So this is a lot of work that's been done not only by myself in my dissertation, which you can see is kind of the gray line that covers a big swath of that, but the publications that we've done from that have been slowly building up toward the Dewey cyclothem, but we're not there yet. Some pretty important things happen in this interval, and we've been also capable of correlating these to other North American basins as well. So this has proved to be pretty good effort in trying to get everybody, at least in North America, organized so we can then try and figure out how to get all these endemic things correlated globally. So next slide. The main focus of the work that I do is on this Idionothodid variability. These Idionothodid conodonts have incredibly diverse morphologies. As I've been looking at them throughout the years and staring at these variable platformed elements, I've been seeing these patterns of changes that we observe kind of over and over again. The little line diagram that you see kind of in the off center here of the slide, this is from my dissertation, just kind of a quick attempt to summarize all the possible variations that we might possibly see on an Idionothodid platform. And also kind of an investigation into what is a trough and what isn't a trough. And so you can see kind of in the top two photomicrographs, the difference between kind of a flat Idionothodid element versus a troughed Idionothodid element in the second picture from the top. So that is the more traditional difference from a Idionothodis on top and a Streptonothodis on the second photo. And the bottom two photos that you see there are kind of attempts for those platformed elements to try and develop their own trough without actually troughing. And we'll talk more about those as we kind of see them pop up in our platform or in our cycle by cycle analysis. The platform modifications that we're looking at here follow two basic trends, enlargement and reduction. What we're going to look for are how big are the accessory lobes? Are we seeing a kind of dorsoventral elongation? Or are we seeing a rostrocaudal expansion, or both at the same time? And then on top of that, we're going to go from those base states of whether we've got a flat or a troughed, or what I'm even calling now pseudo-troughed for these weird things that try to trough. We're going to look for things like complete transverse ridges, or are we going to have grooves, whether they're eccentric, marginal, or medial grooves. We'll look at medial nodosity, how we might see maybe an elongation of the medial carina, and then we'll look at just nodosity in general. Do we see nodose platforms? Do we see nodose margins? And even the formation of pseudo parapets, which is something that I've been looking a lot at lately. So next slide. So while we'll focus on Idianathodus and its variation through time, we're also going to have to take notice of the extinction of Neonathodus, and we do capture a very nice Neonathodus community in the Lost Branch Formation. Very typical Neonathodus roundi found here, and a pretty wide variety of other Neonathodus morphotypes, which I've essentially clumped into two groups. Essentially, you've got either one row of parapets on one side of the element or two rows on both sides of the element. And then I look at kind of whether or not those parapets are complete, meaning that they actually eventually merge with the medial carina. And so you can see morphotypes 1A and 1B of the one parapeted specimen, where we have a complete parapet that goes all the way down to the medial carina, and 1B where it does not. Then you get morphotype 2 with two separate parapets, and you'll see that the parapet on the right does not connect to the medial carina when you look at morphotype 2B. So this was just a quick way of kind of organizing what is a fairly variable group in my thesis work, and we've not done much with it since, but I've always wanted to do a little more. The importance of Neonathodus here is I think it exerted kind of a diversification limit on the competitor species Idianathodus here. When we see Neonathodus go extinct, we tie that to a massive kind of flooding sequence on the mid-continent basin. And what we end up with is just kind of unrestrained variability and diversification. And that's what we'll see happen as we go through this. Next slide, please. There are several other genera that appear frequently, but none of them appear frequently enough to be biostratigraphically useful. Hyndiotis and Adetonathus and Idioprioniotis can be found in just about every cyclothem, but they're not very variable. So you can see the Hyndiotis specimen is the top left. Between the Lost Branch and the Swope here, a major cycle higher, you really don't see too much variability. The same goes for Adetonathus, which are the two middle photos, and the same really for your Idioprioniotis, which run down the right side. There is some variability in Gonduella. We do see more traditional Gonduella magna, the very crenulated version, in the Lost Branch, and Gonduella sublanceolata in the Swope cyclothem. But again, they only appear kind of in these deeper water environments and are very much not useful for kind of that scale of correlation that we're looking at. Next slide. So this is how we're going to start our kind of walk through the cyclothems of the mid-continent. We're starting down in the Farlington intermediate cyclothem, so a little bit closer to the traditional Kasimovian boundary, lower Kasimovian boundary. And what I'm doing in this chart that you see on the right is just plotting variation in certain features. This is by no means an extensive list of features. The first grouping of 3 from the right is your caudal lobe features, whether it's robust, reduced, or simply no caudal lobe. The middle set of boxes here represents the rostral lobe, and we go from elongated rostral lobes to expanded to medially restricted, restricted, and no rostral lobe. And then some of the platform modifications mark the set of boxes on the left. We're looking at troughs, medial nodosity, medial carina, medial grooves, and eccentric grooves. And I'll actually pop in another one a little bit later on for pseudo parapets. When we start down in this Farlington cyclothem, what we see are basically two species that dominate. You've got Suedolina neoshoensis, and you've got Idionethotus delicatus, and they are two very different specimens. You have the troughed species of neoshoensis out of the genus Suedolina, and the flat platformed Idionethotus delicatus. Delicatus appears long before this. It is a very weird and variable species. As of right now, it seems to be kind of the average is to have this medially restricted rostral lobe and a well-developed caudal lobe, and everything else is a variation in between. The specimen to the left on the bottom is the holotype specimen of Idionethotus delicatus. Unfortunately, it is a very small specimen, so it does not show lobe development very well. And so I've been using the specimen on the right from Suede as a more appropriate kind of middle-ranged version of Idionethotus delicatus as I look at conodonts in this interval. Let's go to the next slide. In the Altamont cyclothem, this is our first major cyclothem of the talk, we actually see a decent diversification with the addition of one new very important species, Idionethotus suedei. And it was Suede who recognized this kind of distinct species here, where all of a sudden, in addition to the delicatus, which you see to the right on the bottom, you see these massive kind of expanded rostral lobes and very well-developed robust caudal lobes that we see for Idionethotus suedei. And yes, even these early versions actually do start to show kind of an eccentric groove, but we lose those eccentric grooves very quickly through this process in North America. Again, just more Suedolina neoshoensis here in this zone for the Suedolina species. Let's go to the next slide. Here we are in the Norfleet. In the Norfleet, we add a species of Suedolina. We go from neoshoensis on the left on top to Notocarinata on the right on the top, a little bit more expanded rostral lobe. And we see the same Idionethotus species here, except we've really kind of lost delicatus, and we're now into true expansis. And expansis has a very restricted rostral lobe. You'll notice that restricted rostral lobe is not very well developed, and it does not extend beyond that first true transverse ridge on that margin of the element. So Suedolina notocarinata is the new one, and this puts us in the Suedolina notocarinata zone. We remain in the Neonethotus roundii zone, and we're going to do this for one more cycle. But here you can see that diversification is occurring, but it's relatively slow. We don't see a huge number of new forms. Let's go to the next slide. By the time we get to the lost branch, things are actually not as diverse. We lose Suedolina neoshoensis. It does not show up. And as of now, I have not identified any direct other species other than Notocarinata, but I will admit there's probably some work to be done here that could maybe shed some light on some other issues with Suedolina. But it is a fairly simple assemblage with simple, very well-developed Idionethotus expansis. You can see those nice restricted rostral lobes there, and really beautifully developed Idionethotus suedei. And these suedei are fairly robust and very, very common in this cyclothem. We do have Neonethotus here, abundant Gonduella, and pretty much everything else as well. But we already have started to see here a little bit of decline in diversity because of the loss of Suedolina neoshoensis. And if we go to the next slide, that leads us into kind of the late Des Moines extinction. A lot happens in this extinction. In terms of conodonts, which is where I live, it's Neonethotus, the entire genus, Suedolina, the entire genus, and Idionethotus expansis all go extinct following the lost branch cyclothem. So we lose a whole lot of conodonts, and these neonethodids going away, I think, ends up kind of opening up Idianethotis for a pretty massive diversification in the next major cratonic flood that we see in the Missourian. There are a number of other species that go extinct at this boundary. These are not my research at all, but you can see the list there. The only one of these I'm even remotely familiar with is Mesolobus. You can see the photo of Mesolobus here, which in Texas especially has been very useful in identifying whether or not you're in Des Moinesian or Missourian strata. When we see that, we know we're a little low for where I traditionally work, and it's been pretty helpful in narrowing things down. Next slide. This brings us to the checkerboard South Mound. This is a minor cyclothem, and most of the time we don't even report these things in the zonations, but it was given the Idianethotis sulciferus zone in Barrick's paper. And this is a zone kind of characterized by Idianethotis swadeyi, which has now lost its eccentric groove essentially. And it hangs out here as an expanded rostral lobe form, but we immediately see the addition of two moderately restricted rostral lobe forms, kind of filling that void left by Idianethotis expansus. We're seeing a little bit of lobe reduction that starts to throw in here. And we do see reduced caudal lobes here as well. So the immediate response to the loss of Idianethotis expansus, I think, is the development of Idianethotis sulciferus and Idianethotis harkii, with sulciferus being on the left in the middle and harkii being on the bottom right. This would be the small Idianethotis sulciferus zone. Next slide. At the point that we get to see Idianethotis eccentricus, a very well-known form around the world, and Idianethotis hecli now, which I was very pleased to see showing up just about everywhere. Idianethotis hecli and eccentricus are represented by these eccentric grooved forms that appear again for the first time in this sequence. So we've lost the eccentric groove, and now we redevelop it again in the X-line level here in North America. This is the Idianethotis eccentricus zone, which marks the Des Moinesian Missourian boundary in North America. And you can see eccentricus on the left, on the bottom, and hecli on the right, on the bottom. Again, the main difference between them being a restricted rostral lobe for eccentricus and an expanded rostral lobe for hecli. And you can see that diversification is now starting to shift a little bit more to the left with some more robust features, and we're starting to see some platform development as well. Next slide. At the Hertha level, we see the development of Idianethotis turbatus, also found in several other basins around the world, and some very endemic forms like Idianethotis vorax, and some other forms in the mid-continent that seem to be correlatable, at least across North America, like Gemmiformis and Corrugatus. At this point, I'm only showing you the new versions because we're heading into a big diversification here. We see turbatus on top left, vorax on top right with a very elongate rostral lobe. And then you see Gemmiformis and Corrugatus. Corrugatus essentially loses its rostral lobe, and Gemmiformis takes all of its lobes and kind of sticks them up substantially more to the ventral end of the platform. Rather than expand downward, it kind of pushes the whole Conodont element ventrally. This is the Idianethotis turbatus zone, and you can see we've now really started to expand in our diversification. The diversification here reaches its peak in the next cyclothem, so next slide. This is the Swope cyclothem, and here we see the development of pretty much every possible feature that I've come up with as I was studying these Idianethotid conodonts, including you'll see the new box for pseudo-parapets. And you'll notice trough is filled in here, but it's not a true trough. This is kind of that pseudo trough where we're trying to make a trough out of a flat platformed element by raising the margins. And that generally correlates with the presence of pseudo-parapets, which I'll talk about here in a second. So we have Idianethotis populatus, which is a really weird endemic form, just purely nodes. all across the platform. We see Idianathodus clavotulus, which looks like it's trying to develop a trough, but it's really just an eccentric groove and some higher margins on the platform. The traditional Idianathodus cancellosus, which we see in the top right, that is that very prominent ridge on the caudal lobe, is pretty standard for Idianathodus cancellosus. And then we see kind of the terrible three, Idianathodus pseudocarinatus, biliratus, and neveravensis. These are my three parapetid forms. These folks, these conodonts develop really high marginal ridges, yet they remain relatively flat platformed, despite the fact that they kind of elongate their medial carina or have a pseudo carina by having two eccentric grooves. These forms come in like a storm, just appear out of nowhere, and then they're going to stick around just for a little bit and go right away. So this is kind of our peak Idianathodid diversification. And then on our next slide, we get to the Mound Valley. Now, we've started to lose species here. So you'll notice our diversification is going down, but we're still pretty diverse when we get to the Mound Valley. This is another minor cyclothem, and it's the start of the Idianathodus confragus zone with the appearance of Idianathodus confragus, which is kind of our top two specimens here on the illustration. They are very reduced in their rostral and caudal lobes, and they are also more ventrally oriented. We have those lobes developing more on the ventral end rather than kind of extending downward along the platform. And these are fairly flat specimens as well. In our recent paper, looking at the Kinney quarry fauna, we did identify one of these species that is just really unique to the Kinney quarry as far as we know in North America. So that is Idianathodus kinniensis. And we have Idianathodus coffeevillensis as well. Coffeevillensis is a new species represented by the two that you see on the bottom. These are found in both the mid-continent and in strata from New Mexico. What we see is this very kind of robust rostral side of the element where the lobe has almost become incorporated into the platform itself. So we see this very wide rostral side of the platform, very asymmetric in appearance because of this development on this rostral lobe. And it seems like kinniensis is a bit of a variation on that. So that puts us in the confragus zone, and now we can go to the next slide. For the Dennis, this is the next major cyclothem up, and it is very well known for Idianathodus magnificus, which you see at the top here. Very robust rostral and caudal lobes. This is our first return of robust rostral and caudal lobes. And we also see Idianathodus cherryvalensis, the two bottom photos here, where you're actually getting a good look at the complete loss of rostral and caudal lobes. So reduction is kind of the trend that we're observing from the swope up, and we had previously seen from the lost branch up kind of a trend toward expansion. So we're seeing these two different swings overall in our Idianathodids. The Dennis still belongs to the Idianathodus confragus zone. The really big major event that's going to change everything here comes in the next slide. And so let's do the next slide. There we go, the hog shooter cyclothem, where we see 4 species of Streptonathodus pop in. And I say pop in because maybe we can trace some of these, like Streptonathodus elegantulus. We might be able to get Gracillus and elegantulus tied to Idianathodus cherryvalensis because they have very poorly developed rostral lobes. These are truly troughed specimens. And then we have the more advanced rostral lobe forms of Increbescens and Excelsis on the bottom of the photos that you see here. And right now, I struggle to find a way to kind of evolve them out of what I have in the mid-continent. So some of these may, in fact, have come over from another location. Regardless, importantly here, you'll notice all of those unique forms for the swope through the Dennis, the parapeted forms, they're gone. We're losing all of those things that tried to be like Neonathotis. They had parapets. They were trying to kind of mimic that Neonathotis form, but they're gone now. And they have been replaced essentially by these truly troughed specimens of Streptonathotis as they appear here. Based on my work at a couple sections in Oklahoma, it is almost a bed-to-bed change where you will switch from a Dennis fauna to hog shooter, where we see the Streptonathotis. Let's go to the next slide. After that, we only see the addition of one species at a time in the overlying cherry veil, and then on the next slide, we see the Dewey. And really, we're just seeing the addition of two new forms. And again, just by the time we get to the Dewey, which is one of our major flooding high stand sequences, we start to see a development of a pseudo trough where we raise those marginal ridges and try and develop kind of a fake trough in multinodosis. But that's pretty much all of the morphology that we've seen. And I've left about 5 minutes here for Jim Barrick, so I'm going to turn it over to him on the next slide.
Jim, you would need to unmute and turn on your video.
I think I got it on.
We can hear you. I don't
Can you
see
hear me
you.
now?
Yes. I don't see you though.
Well, that's okay.
Okay. Oh, there we go.
I don't have much to say here because I think Steve has covered things very, very well with it. But I want to point out a couple things. I think that, again, in a practical sense, in North America, it's very easy to tell Des Moinnian from Missourian Conodonts. It's quite, in the Des Moinnian, you have these Suetolinas and you have Neonathotis, okay? And this extinction event is really quite incredible. And I think globally, we're dealing here with the case of, again, in particular, there's a datum like the extinction of Suetolinas, okay, and the extinction, in some cases, different times of Neonathotis. And in all these areas, we're seeing this massive radiation of new Neonathotis species. And the question is, and the thing that bothers me a great deal is, how endemic are these patterns of radiation? Do we have, again, I think North America is highly endemic, okay, and that's part of our problem. But again, in the Russian platform and Donetsk Base in South China, there are comparable radiations going on. But when I look at these faunas in these other areas, it's the case, they look similar, but they don't look the same. So it's very difficult for me to tell if, again, the species are in common. And would caution everybody about using North American names with it, where it's possible we have very similar patterns of evolution going on with different species clades developing into different regions, with some exchange for sure, okay? But again, it's still very confusing. I think morphometrics and more study will work this out. And I think we'll see many more species being named as these studies are done more often with it. As far as the traditional basis of Kasimovian, there's no Conodont way to recognize this at all. We can approximate it by doing cycles, again, but there's no direct way to correlate with it. Now, there's been mention of the presence of subexcelsis in the Salsasaqua section, something I didn't remember with it. Now, Steve has looked at the Salsasaqua Conodonts, and I don't remember any subexcelsis, but I'll also point out that even if they are there, they would be equivalent to what would be the Lost Branch cycle, which is our latest Des Moinnian cycle, nowhere near, again, the first occurrence of Suetolinas subexcelsis. But I think that's all I have to add to this.
Steve, do you want to say anything else before we move on?
don't really have anything much to add to that. I think the endemic North American fauna is very endemic, and it really does pose a pretty massive challenge here for correlation. It is good to see similar things in other basins. I'm just not sure how you go about doing it, and I hope that we can all figure this out. I think morphometrics might be a good way to go, and I think Nick Hogenkamp is really pulling some pretty incredible weight here in evaluating some of these significant forms and morphotypes. So hopefully that can really help clear up some of this issue.
Well, thank you both. Thanks, Steve and Jim, for that. Questions? We're open for questions. If we've got anybody out there, I certainly have some, which maybe just make some notes. But let's start. Kei, who you have a question? Go right ahead. Unmute and light yourself up there.
All right. Hi, Steve.
Hi.
Hi. I'm pretty sure you have read the paper of the new Russian colleagues. That's about Hecla and Tubatus, and
Yes.
And you probably also saw my presentation. And do you agree our identification about the Hecla and Tubatus?
Absolutely. I mean, they look extraordinarily similar, and I think there are some forms in the Russian work where maybe it's not quite true Hecla or true Turbatus, but it's close. And I think the same is true for some of the South China specimens, but I do think you have some that look almost bang on direct correlation to Idianathodus turbatus and Idianathodus heckelai. I noticed in your presentation, I loved the variability, the transitional forms that you were showing, because that's a lot of what we see here in North America as well. We see these very transitional states. It's just here we have that cyclothem imprint on everything. So each of our cyclothems kind of clarifies an end member of those variations. And I think that's actually helped us to break them down a little bit more, but that's something that we're lucky to have, I guess.
Right. Thank you. That would be all.
Bill, you're muted.
Thanks. That's why Spencer can't hear me either. Maybe we should let Spencer go. Spencer, you had a question and you're up next, and I was assuming you weren't there.
I know you're all surprised I have a question. I mean, this one's for Jim Barrick. First, what a great talk, Steve. Thank you for that. Okay, so here's what I got. I listened to Natalia. She's essentially, I think, arguing that we should use subexcelsa, the base of the traditional Kasimovian. And according to her, that's very correlated. Then I go to Kayi, and Kayi pushes the idea that we use something higher, Heckelai, whatever, something in there. Their evaluation is that's good and it's very correlatable. Then Jim comes up and he kind of throws water on all of this and says, well, there's a lot of, local lineages and I'm all that. But my question to Jim is, if we had to vote today on a Conodont criterion for the base of the Kasimovian, what's your vote?
You mean Conodont species or what?
Yeah, where would you put the base of the Kasimovian? Because we're getting kind of two messages, one from Natalia, another one from Kayi, and then we get the American message, which is, I don't know what to say. It's more nuanced, confusing to me. Where are we going here? I mean, do we need 5 more years of morphometric study and further analysis before we can even use conodonts to define the base of the Kasimovian?
Well, the easy level is the extinction of the Suedolinus species, because that's like turning the lights out morphometrically with it. And then the other things of Heckelai or Turbatus and stuff, what we're seeing are different aspects of irradiation of Idianathodus after the extinction of the Suedolinus. I think the extinction of the Suedolinus is really a major Conodont event, and it's, you know, it's sort of black and white, unlike the shades of gray we see in going from Suedii to Heckelii, or to Eccentricus to Turbatus and all these other things with it.
So you would want to use the extinction event as the primary signal of the boundary?
That's the easy thing to use in Conodonts. It's
What
something,
is
if
that?
you look at it, everybody, you look at the reference in terms of the different types of Edianothotis species, you can draw a reference line with the last Suedolina all the way across everywhere without quibbling about whether it's truly Turbatus or not, or truly Heckelii or not. Now, there are different species of Suedolina, but again, it's a very distinctive genus with it. So that's another possibility. I don't think, why not use an extinction event? No one says you have to use an origination event, do they?
No, but you know, I mean, I'm with you. I'm okay with that. But you know, the typical argument against the extinction event is going to be that it's going to be harder to recognize that last, you know, given Signor-Lipps effects, you're going to have a harder time recognizing that last Suedolina, and it's a lot easier to recognize the first Heckelii or something like that. So that's the conceptual argument against using extinctions. But I'm not sure.
I think that's only a conceptual argument. It's not a practical argument. First occurrences have the same problems. So it's no difference between recognizing first and last occurrences. There's errors on both ends.
Okay.
But again, if you're talking about, you know, simplifying the taxonomy, you know, what's easy? I mean, it's easy to tell a Suedolina, especially these late Suedolinas, from any of the Edianothotis. So that's, like I said, that's a black and white definition, not shades of gray that, again, even I worry about.
So now, how about, let's put Steve on the spot. Do you agree with Jim?
I think Suedolina is absolutely the easier pick. I personally love Edianothotis Heckelii and Turbatus, but I don't think they're as easily going to mark the same level across the entire globe. That Endemoinian extinction here was so prominent. And it seems to be, with Suedolina, it hit everywhere at about the same time. It just seems to be the most recognizable level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd love to do it in an appearance. To me, I've always felt like appearances were better, but Jim makes the point completely valid that there are problems with first appearances too. And now when you're talking about this variability that makes the first appearance of a Heckelii so potentially different in every basin, even if it's off by a few meters or a few, even a small formation difference, that's going to be problematic. What do you make a true Heckelii? It's really easy in North America to do it because we have that cyclothem imprint on everything. And it just makes it stand out. But I don't think it's as easy globally.
Good. You know, I would love to hear what Kayi and Natalia have to say about this, but maybe I can ask the moderator, save it till the discussion at the end, because I don't think we really have time. I'd love to hear, because, you know, to me, what I'm seeing is there's kind of an American point of view, there's a Chinese point of view, and a Russian point of view, which of course are largely rooted in where you're working, you know, in your own backyard. And it would be really great to have, I mean, you guys have made a strong case for the extinction of Suedolina. I would just be curious. Can we do that in the discussion afterwards, Jim, after the next talk? So don't go away. Don't go away, Jim. You're still on the hook.
I'll get more coffee.
Thank you, guys. I'm fine.
Bill, do you have a message from me, Bill Ossich, in the chat?
I don't see one, Bill. No, but go ahead.
I don't see where it got saved either. Anyway, so what are the chances that you had and it's sort of non-traditional to think about it this way, but a global extinction and then radiations, endemic radiations in different basins. So you could have, if the extinction was global, it would be, the individual radiations would be in different basins, could be viewed as the base of the Kasimovian. I mean, it's not, again, non-traditional, but from a practical standpoint of what might have really happened, what are people's thoughts about that?
Sounds fine to me. That's with it. Again, I worry about how endemic the species are during their radiation and the problem that this causes with detailed correlation. Again, let's see, Steve, they look a lot alike, some are identical, but there are many other morphotypes in the same populations to me look quite different with it. So I think we maybe see a similar morphological response in the radiation, but again, each geographic area has its own, like what you call signature.
Yeah.
With the endemic forms. And again, there's differences in the environments. And again, the Russian platform has different carbonate environments than the South China environments are. The North American environments are different too. We have this imprint as well with it. The thing is, these Neonathoters just go crazy after the extinction event, which it makes it in North America, certainly the early Missourian look very, very distinctive.
Okay, thanks.
Steve, anything else?
No, I'm good.
Okay, we're good. Thank you both very much. Thanks for the questions, guys. And we'll load up the next talk, please.